It's the greatest lie ever told. A nation is entranced and deceived into believing it through the power of persuasion.
It's an absolutely central weapon of war, and the Nazis are the masters of propaganda.
Germans are brainwashed into believing they are the master race, and the Jews and other races inferior, and they need to be crushed.
This is it. This is where Hitler really molded the Nazi empire together.
Using the power of rhetoric, radio, and cinema, Hitler and Goebbels brainwashed the minds of millions, leading them into the darkest chapter of their history and to catastrophic defeat. This is the story of a megastructure that underpinned the entire Third Reich.
Oh my goodness. Secret Berlin.
Hitler's propaganda machine. The biggest construction projects of World War II, ordered by Hitler to secure world domination. Now they survive as dark reminders of the Führer's fanatical military ambition. These are the secrets of the Nazi megastructures. Spring 1945. As Soviet forces advance on Berlin, Nazi defeat and an end to the Second World War seem inevitable. Yet German civilians, ordinary men, women, and children, prepare for a brutal fight to the death.
Keep going.
Outnumbered and outgunned on all fronts, German soldiers like 23-year-old Bruno Mance will not give up, despite the insurmountable odds.
Get down!
In the final battle for Berlin, 100,000 civilians will lose their lives. 6,000 will commit suicide. The nation is now a ferocious civilian army, viewing surrender as a fate worse than death. Everywhere, Germans have been brainwashed to fight to the death, thanks to a keystone of the Nazi regime: propaganda. 12 years earlier, Bruno Mance is an impressionable 11-year-old attending Nazi rallies with his parents. He's one of millions captivated by Hitler's extraordinary public persona.
He ruled over the crowd like a mass hypnotist. And from that moment on, my mind was imprisoned by him.
Und wir müssen fest zusammenstehen für dieses Deutschland.
Conflict archaeologist Tony Pollard is in Nuremberg, exploring the birthplace of Nazi mind control.
This is a place I've always wanted to visit, but equally I've always been very nervous about, because what we have here is the center of the Nazi propaganda machine. And I'm about to set eyes on it for the first time. Oh, good grief.
Kann es nicht anders sein und es wird auch nicht anders sein.
It still very much looks like all of those propaganda movies we've all seen. With this field here just packed with thousands of Nazis. This is it. This is where it all happened. This is where Hitler really molded the Nazi empire together and stood just up there.
The story of Nazi propaganda begins in 1920, when Adolf Hitler is made chief of propaganda for the German Workers' Party, which he will transform into the Nazi Party. He shows an aptitude for self-promotion, and in 1923, as Nazi leader, he's arrested after an attempt to seize power in Munich by force. His trial for the Munich beer hall putsch gains him exactly what he craves: national notoriety. Whilst Hitler's in jail, the man who'll become his right hand in the creation of the Nazi propaganda machine rises through the party ranks. Having attained a PhD in German literature, Dr. Joseph Goebbels is an intelligent man, a working journalist and aspiring author. Walking with a limp because of a foot deformity caused by childhood polio, Goebbels cuts a distinctive figure and, like Hitler, demonstrates a flair for propaganda. In his extensively kept diaries, Goebbels recalls his early impressions of meeting Hitler.
Mein Führer.
Herr Dr. Goebbels.
He shakes my hand like an old friend. And those big blue eyes, like stars.
Please, sit down. How was your journey? Pleasant, I hope?
A little tiresome because of the snow.
I was very pleased with your speech at the meeting in Bamberg. It made an impression on me, and it really helped me. You could have an important role to play in this movement.
Danke, Herr Hitler. He is glad to see me. I am in heaven.
Hitler shrewdly appoints Goebbels head of propaganda in the Nazi Party.
Hitler understands that he's able to mesmerize an entire crowd. Goebbels realized that he's able to mesmerize an entire nation through the use of propaganda. So really, Goebbels and Hitler are working as a team. They're a kind of sort of marriage of minds, and they realize that one can't really operate without the other.
Over the next decade, Goebbels masterminds Hitler's public appearances. Many at the vast, purpose-built Nazi rally grounds in Nuremberg. Designed by architect Albert Speer in 1934, this is one of the biggest concentrations of Nazi buildings anywhere in the Third Reich.
The feel of this place is very familiar. The architecture is modelled on the Pergamon temple from ancient Greece, where they worshipped Zeus. Zeus being a god, Hitler being seen in the same way. And it's all of that sort of cultural and historical legacy that Hitler is stealing to put to his own purposes.
At its peak in 1938, the Nuremberg rally attracts almost 750,000 devotees, idolizing Hitler with something approaching religious fervor.
Most of the activity at the Nuremberg rallies took place outside, but there are interior spaces. And I'm told that behind this massive set of metal doors, there's something quite spectacular. Oh, look at that. It's just like walking into a Greek temple. Marble walls and really high ceiling with mosaic decoration with gold. But it's not any mosaic. It's interlocking swastikas from one end of this great hall to the other. And what we've got here is the Nazi philosophy really being turned into a pseudo-religion. And this is their sacred space. And look at this. This huge cauldron, I think the technical term is crater. And this would have been outside, and there would have been a pair of these. And you can imagine the spectacle being added to by the fire that was lit in here on days special to the Nazis, and almost as a way of commemorating the dead that gave their lives for Greater Germany and the Nazi cause. This space is unique. It's probably the only intact interior space designed by the architect, Albert Speer. The rest of them were destroyed in the war, modified later, or demolished. But this is locked in here. It's like a tomb.
But no matter how many speeches Hitler makes, they can only be heard by the captive audience. His extraordinary performances need to be communicated to the entire nation. And Dr. Joseph Goebbels knows exactly how to make that happen. In 1930s Germany, Adolf Hitler claims he's the savior who'll lead the country out from the shadow of World War I defeat. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, his brilliant head of propaganda, identifies the device that will help Hitler win over the nation.
One of the Nuremberg rallies, Hitler can talk to thousands of Germans, but through radio, you can speak to the entire nation.
Goebbels' masterstroke is to launch a cheap, state-produced radio, massively boosting public radio ownership. As Hitler comes to power in 1933, the Volksempfänger, or People's Receiver, becomes the conduit by which the Nazis' warped doctrine reaches German households. Over the next 6 years, radio ownership almost quadruples.
On the eve of war, there are more radios in Germany and per household than anywhere else in the entire world, including the United States.
Having a propaganda tool in German households is only useful if Goebbels can unlock its power. To do so, he bans other voices in the media. In 1935, 1,600 publications are closed down. In 1938, 10,000 more are outlawed. Radio becomes the mouthpiece for Nazi propaganda, skillfully blended into everyday schedules to make the Nazi message seem acceptable.
He completely takes over all private radio stations. It all comes under his control. What Goebbels understands is that you can't just have Hitler's speeches blaring out 24/7. There has to be other stuff. And part of the drip, drip, drip effect of the message that he's trying to get across is interspersing that with other materials, so music, comedy, other stuff. That is what makes it so effective. It's that crucial mixture.
The repeated messages of propaganda are simple, patriotic, and deliberately divisive. Identifying enemies to despise promotes a sense of unity and racial superiority.
Goebbels' great mantra is repeat, repeat, repeat. It's not one message. It's Hitler is our savior, Hitler is a genius, we are right, Jews are bad. These are messages that are just repeated over and over, and the whole nation is effectively brainwashed.
At home in Dortmund, Bruno Mans and his father are avid listeners. They absorb Hitler's claims of global Jewish and communist conspiracies standing in the way of German prosperity. In 1933, Bruno is one of 2 million children nationwide signed up for the Hitler Youth.
Part of the relentlessness of this propaganda is by indoctrinating people at a very early age. If you start them young, you can get them to believe pretty much anything you want.
By law, the Hitler Youth soon becomes the only youth organization permitted to exist. In addition, around 40 national political institutes of education are created throughout Germany. Schools for future Nazi leaders. Historian Peter Lieb is exploring the abandoned remains of the only purpose-built school near Leipzig.
When the Nazis came to power in 1933, they didn't believe to stay in power just for a decade or so. They believed to create a 1,000-year Reich. And this Reich needed future generations of elites to rule Germany and the annexed territories in the east. Here it stands derelict, a monument of Nazi elitism.
This, like most of the institutes for the Nazi elite, is a boarding school just for boys, aged 10 to 18.
Oh, look at this. Just imagine 10-year-old boys walking down these corridors.
But 3 schools are designated just for girls. While the boys are drilled for war, the girls are taught to support their menfolk, run the household, and, if possible, bear blue-eyed, blonde-haired children to secure the future of the anticipated 1,000-year Nazi empire.
In order to attend this school, the young boys had to undergo a 1-week selection process. You had to be Aryan, white as snow, and be the fittest of the fittest. Even classes excluded you from coming to this place. Obedience and courage were paramount. The young boys had to run alone through the dark forest. Just imagine how scary this is for a 10-year-old. Also, non-swimmers had to jump from a 3-meter board into the deep water, being dragged out by the swimmers. If you were a swimmer, you had to jump from a 3rd floor into a blanket.
It's not unheard of for over half the students to fail the tough 8-year schooling. But for those who make it through, rich pickings await. Successful graduates can expect prestigious careers. Even so, 80% opt to become officers in the army.
Wow, projectors! They would have shown propaganda films to these impressionable kids. At the time of this school, in the late 1930s, films were the most modern form of media. Films were crucial to Nazi propaganda.
Goebbels is an avid moviegoer. He's inspired by the power of an unlikely film genre, the partisan cinema of communist Russia.
We can learn a lot from these Bolsheviks, particularly the ways in which they use propaganda.
He realizes it's an art form the Nazis can manipulate to further their agenda.
With radio, you can just hear it, but with film, it's a much more immersive experience. It's a visual treat. And Goebbels recognizes that this comparatively new medium is one that he can use absolutely to its fullest potential.
Goebbels appoints himself patron of the German cinema. In 1934, actress and aspiring filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl is commissioned to film the Nuremberg Rally. She produces Triumph of the Will, a feature-length documentary regarded as one of the greatest propaganda films in history. It glorifies the Nazi Party and depicts Hitler as the classical hero who will lead Germany to greatness. It's a huge hit domestically, and even wins awards in international film festivals. But it's not just documentaries that Goebbels promotes. He wants to make sure that his propaganda reaches as wide an audience as possible. So almost 90% of film scripts approved by Goebbels are dramas, comedy, and light entertainment. Between 1933 and 1942, the number of cinema-goers increases 400%, all watching movies carefully selected for their Nazi message. Bruno Mance is one of millions who's bombarded by propaganda to believe in the Nazi cause.
It was not one single speech or movie that overwhelmed me. It was a never-ending hail of lies, half-truths, cliches and misrepresentations. They affected me day in, day out, in Hitler Youth, at school, in the newspapers, at the movie theaters, everywhere.
Bruno will graduate seamlessly from the Hitler Youth to the army, brainwashed by propaganda to do anything for Hitler and his fascist cause. He's not alone. As the Second World War breaks out, almost 5 million German soldiers are primed to fight for the Nazi cause. September 1939. As Nazi troops invade Poland, It's with the warped conviction that world domination is both inevitable and justified. Fueled by the self-belief provided through propaganda, their advance across Western Europe is seemingly unstoppable. By June 1940, the Nazis have taken by force Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. But after defeat in the Battle of Britain, Hitler turns his attentions east, launching Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. So confident is Hitler of success, he wants to push on with a project of extraordinary ambition.
Hitler has great plans to completely refashion Berlin as a new capital, Germania. As the Reich is growing, so their empire is getting bigger, and it's important for them to have this center point, this focus, this capital. Berlin's not it. It's got to be Germania in the same way that Rome is the center of the Roman Empire.
With chief architect Albert Speer, Hitler draws up plans to totally transform Berlin into a capital city of monumental renown.
Speer, these plans will show the world our intentions. Our capital will instill a sense of unity in the entire German radical core, no matter how far away they are.
Showing no signs now of the Nazis' grand ambition, this park in downtown Berlin is the location chosen by Hitler for the centerpiece of Germania. The domed Grand Hall is planned to be the biggest enclosed space in the world. The 3-mile-long Avenue of Splendors, designed by Hitler himself, is to be traffic-free, all cars and trains diverted underground with 2 new rail termini at each end. The avenue is marked by the Volkshalle at one end, and at the other, a testament to Germany's military might, the magnificent Arch of Triumph. But Speer soon identifies a problem with the project that may put an end to Hitler's dreams of Germania before construction even begins. This bizarre building today tells the story of the Führer's thwarted ambition.
This is perhaps not much to look at, but nonetheless it is an important and very vivid indication of the scale of this enormous rebuilding project. The problem with Berlin is there's no rock here, it's just sand and clay. And so big was the planned Arch of Triumph that they didn't know whether it could take the weight of it. So what you've got here is 12,000 tons of concrete built into the Berlin soil, from which they would take measurements and see what kind of levels of slippage and sinkage actually occurred. If this structure can stay firm in its position, then they're all clear to build the huge, even bigger Arch of Triumph.
This massive concrete Schweberleistungskörper, or heavy load-bearing structure, is built for one single purpose.
It's quite unnerving being in here because I know there's 45 feet of solid concrete above me.
It's a giant, full-scale measuring tool.
I can start to understand why this is narrower at this point, because on this plinth here, you'd have a theodolite. Now, theodolite is the instrument that surveyors use for measuring the folds in the land, and you use it to measure the movement every single day and see whether there's any subsidence.
Measurements show that the building sinks by 7 inches over 2.5 years, jeopardizing the engineering credibility of the project from the outset. However, Hitler's enthusiasm for Germania never wanes. James is exploring the area around the former zoo, the Berlin Tiergarten, for more evidence of this engineering white elephant.
There were going to be huge, great boulevards, 100 yards wide, 4 miles long. The scale and scope of it was unlike anything that had ever been witnessed before. There's so little of those plans that survive, but right beneath where I'm standing right now, here in the Tiergarten, is the remnants of the early part of that gargantuan construction project.
The extraordinary folly that lies deep beneath the Berlin soil is largely unknown to its citizens. Construction began in 1938, but was put on hold in 1941. Then it was boarded up. Its very existence forgotten by authorities until its rediscovery in 1969.
Oh, my goodness. It's just extraordinary. Secret Berlin, and it's amazing to think that this is all that remains of Hitler's grandiose plans for Germania.
This abandoned, unlit subterranean cavern is a section of the highly ambitious road tunnel designed to divert traffic under the Avenue of Splendors.
You can almost, I think, imagine the Mercedes and Hawks hurtling down through here, this sort of underpass under the Volkshalle.
Sections of this subterranean superhighway network are almost 50 feet wide. At its longest, it stretches 720 feet.
You know, it's easy to dismiss Germania as just a pipe dream, and yet where we're standing now is proof that the construction of it had got underway. This was planned to become reality.
In 1943, construction of Germania is put on hold until victory over Soviet Russia. But there, something unexpected is happening. Believing his own propaganda, Hitler has overstretched his forces. Now, despite the Nazis' unshakable self-belief, they're in real danger of bloody defeat on the Eastern Front. To avoid this, Goebbels must come up with his most ingenious propaganda performance yet. One that will strengthen the resolve of every German in the Third Reich. Now fighting on three fronts against Great Britain, the USA, and the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany is in danger of losing the war. But in a propaganda masterstroke, for the first time, Goebbels acknowledges the country's plight. He paints defeat at the hands of Soviet Bolsheviks a fate worse than death, and delivers the ultimate call to arms from which there can be no surrender. It's known as the Total War Speech.
Goebbels' speech at the Sport Palace in Berlin in February 1943 is really, really important because it marks a massive sea change. For the first time, he hints to the German people that they might not win. And the only way they can avert this terrible crisis is if every person in Germany puts their heart into the war effort.
I ask you, are you resolved to follow the Führers with thick and thin to victory? And are you willing to accept the heaviest personal burdens?
The speech is a masterpiece of propaganda. Goebbels prepares by standing in front of a mirror, rehearsing different phrases and gestures. The audience is largely made up of carefully selected party functionaries, primed to applaud at pre-arranged points. There are even actors planted in the audience to demonstrate apparently spontaneous gestures of appreciation. As a backup, pre-recorded applause is at the ready. The speech has the desired effect on the battlefronts.
Be quiet, everyone. Dr. Goebbels.
Posted a few miles from the Russian border, junior officer Bruno Mans is one of millions listening avidly.
I am asking you, do you want total war?
Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!
It's not just the troops who are stirred by this rallying cry. At home, all war production is nationalized. German women are called up to work in munitions plants. And mega factories are built to cope with this massive hike in production. Conflict archaeologist Tony Pollard is exploring the vast remains of the Dynamit Nobel factory, where productivity goes into overdrive following Goebbels' call to total war.
When we imagine the Nazi war machine, we think of the guns, the tanks, the ships, the planes. But all of those weapons require explosives in the shells, the bombs, the torpedoes. And that explosive needs to be made somewhere. And I'm here in Poland about to encounter what was probably the biggest explosives factory in the entire Third Reich.
This forgotten megastructure occupies an area of 7.5 square miles. Completely self-sufficient, it boasts facilities for its own fire brigade, 21-mile rail network, and these two vast structures, the factory's own dedicated coal-fueled power stations.
Whoa! Wow! No other word for it. Look at the size of this place.
When Goebbels calls for total war, explosive output here more than triples.
The scale of this, you can imagine the activity. This must have been like a scene from hell, with these furnaces and coal and dust and noise. It's an unbelievable place.
But the increase in productivity has grim consequences for the workers.
One of the most important products here was RDX, which is an explosive about twice as powerful as TNT. Now, a vital ingredient to RDX is methanol. And methanol is a really dangerous, unstable fluid, so it needs very special storage facilities. And that's what we're finding here in this forest. Look at that. This is one of these silos, and it looks just like something out of a science fiction movie. Never seen the like before, and I'm desperate to take a closer look. Oh my. Grief. That must have taken millions of litres of methanol. And there was a steel tank inside, which is now gone. And the function is clear. It's not just storage, it's protection, because that stuff could blow at any time. And if it did, the idea was that the blast would be directed harmlessly upwards. Very lightweight wooden roof, which would have given way instantly. But the thing is that here, explosions were a reality. There was one incident where 80 people were killed just in an instant as something went up. So it was a very, very real risk. It is a reflection of how horrendous the conditions were here for the workers.
Motivated by Goebbels' morale-boosting words, officials step up efforts to transfer workers from non-essential war work to armaments manufacture. The armaments industry increases productivity by 300%. But on the battlefields of Europe, the Nazis are starting to lose ground to the advancing Allied forces. But the wheels of Goebbels' propaganda machine keep turning. And now the Nazis mastermind their most audacious lie yet. Building on their successful use of cinema as a brainwashing tool on their own people, the Nazis now conceive a movie for the international stage. Tony Pollard is in former concentration camp Theresienstadt in the Czech Republic, the scene of the Nazi deception that fools the world.
Theresienstadt begins life as a sleepy barracks town built inside an 18th century fortress. But in 1941, the Gestapo take over. The local population is moved out and Jews are moved in.
The Nazis soon realize there are more middle-class, culturally literate Jews interned here than anywhere else in the Third Reich. They use them as pawns in a propaganda ruse to deceive visiting Red Cross officials that conditions in the camp are exemplary. Inspired by the success of the deception, they then make a documentary intended to dupe an international audience.
This area here is now still very reminiscent of the time it was used as a prop, really, for the propaganda film. And at that time, either side of this drainage cut were gardens. And there are scenes of people tending these gardens, and they're getting across this message that these people are there of their own free will, and it looks fantastic. But the reality is that all of that was a lie, and these people are living in awful conditions. And by the end of the war, 35,000 people died here.
During filming, the Nazis relax the typically austere anti-Semitic regime and tidy up the camp, feed the inmates better food, and give the Jewish children sweets in return for their collaboration. They offer acting and directing roles to some of the Jewish adults, and in return, they promise their lives will be spared. But once the cameras are gone, the camp descends into a state of despair and decay.
The boiler room, and this chamber here has hooks inside it, and clothing would be put in there and steamed at high temperature. It's for delousing, because infestation was a real problem when you had so many people living together in unhygienic conditions.
Most of the 35,000 deaths here are from sanitation diseases such as typhus and dysentery. A further 88,000 inmates are deported to death camps like Auschwitz for execution, including the actors and director of the propaganda film, despite the Nazis' promises. But the Holocaust is a secret far too big even for the devious Department of Propaganda to keep quiet. And ultimately, rumors filter through as far as the front lines, to Nazi-indoctrinated troops like Bruno Mans.
Theresienstadt. That's where they kill the Jews.
What? What do you mean?
It's the truth.
This was the truth that stared me in the face and demanded an answer. But I could not utter a word.
Bruno is hearing the facts for the first time. Inconsistencies that clash with everything he's been brainwashed into believing is right. But his indoctrination is so strong, he will continue fighting ferociously for the Nazi cause. As will the millions of brainwashed citizens at home, who now prepare for the invasion of Germany itself by Allied forces, as the Third Reich finally faces its downfall. Winter 1944. As Germany is pounded on all fronts, defeat is surely imminent. But in a bid to boost the belief of the German people, Goebbels makes a huge gamble based on the success of his earlier propaganda films. Despite the country's dwindling resources, he commissions what will become the most expensive movie of the entire war. Centered on a small Prussian city in Nazi-occupied Poland, Kolberg. The story focuses on a siege on the city by Napoleonic forces in 1807, when its mainly Germanic citizens heroically hold out for over 3 months. Goebbels now wants the story of Kolberg's resistance to inspire Germans everywhere to fight back ferociously, whatever the odds. At this stage of the Second World War, the film is a huge overindulgence.
Kolberg surely has to go down as one of the most ridiculous, extravagant movies ever made. It's got a cast of 187,000 extras, nearly all of whom are soldiers that you'd have thought would have been better used at the front.
But nothing can shake Goebbels' belief in the power of cinema, as he records in his diary.
In terms of the morale of the nation, the film is the equivalent of winning a battle.
The terrible irony is that the movie, when it came out in early 1945, was an absolute flop. And for the city itself of Kolberg, it suffered one of the bloodiest, most catastrophic sieges in the whole entire Second World War.
Despite this, Hitler and Goebbels have German troops and civilians convinced that there's no option but to fight on. Even as the Red Army nears Germany's eastern border, Goebbels draws on reports of Soviet atrocities on German civilians to deliver a series of final war cries to the nation, motivating them through hatred and fear of the advancing Soviet troops.
Our soldiers will go into battle with a devotion like a congregation going to a religious service. When our men shoulder their arms and climb into their tanks, there will be before their eyes the sight of their violated women and their murdered children.
Goebbels never let up and continued to urge Germans to fight for every yard, for every step, to fight to the death and never give up. The alternative, being overrun by the Slavic hordes of Russia, is just too terrible to bear. And so what he's using is the threat of terror to galvanize and whip up the people.
Keep going.
In a brutal war of attrition on the Russian border, Bruno Mance readily absorbs Goebbels' anti-Soviet propaganda.
The thought that they might defeat us and occupy our homeland terrified me. Even more horrifying was the possibility of falling into Russian captivity. Suddenly, the Russian artillery opened up. They fired from all barrels and almost without pause. It was the heaviest artillery fire I have encountered. I stumbled on two men lying on the ground who were wrestling face to face. A huge Russian was on top of a bloody German soldier trying to stab him with a knife. I stepped forward and put the muzzle of my submachine gun tightly to his head and pulled the trigger.
Bruno has been exposed to a lifetime of propaganda, telling him his Soviet foe is subhuman, a lesser mortal who does not deserve to live. Likewise, in Berlin, the influence of Goebbels' propaganda does not weaken, even as the Red Army reaches striking distance of the capital. With the city cut off from its own army, Goebbels incites old men, women, and children to fight to the death against the despised Soviet foe, in the final defense of the Third Reich's once impregnable capital.
And of course, the only thing that happened was a massacre of Germans and Russians alike.
In the brutal final Battle of Berlin, 100,000 civilians lose their lives. Believing in propaganda that capture by the Soviets is a fate worse than death, 6,000 commit suicide. While Berlin burns, Hitler takes refuge in his bunker. Goebbels remains loyal to the bitter end. The day after Hitler's suicide, Goebbels takes a deadly dose of morphine and cyanide, along with his wife and 6 children. Bruno Mance survives the war. Decades later, he writes his memoirs, describing his indoctrination into Nazism and his eventual renunciation of its beliefs. He dies in 2015, his conscience finally exorcised of Goebbels' mind control.